Alright, in this lesson I'll introduce the transpose method, which can be used to swap the axes that make up a pandas panel object. So let's begin by executing our code from the previous lessons to load our pandas panel from pandas data reader. And as I mentioned, when I was first starting out with this library, I was a little bit confused because the default structure is to actually return a panel object where the most outer level, or the layer, of the items axis is the actual stock information. We can see it here. We have the open, the high, the low, the close, the volume, and so on. And the companies that I input was actually being stored as the minor axis, or basically the columns within each one of those 5 data frames. Let's say I wanted to swap it to get to the kind of design that I originally wanted, where I have a panel and then I use the bracket syntax to reference an items axis value, but I want it to be an actual company here so that I extract a data frame that's related to that company's financial performance. What I basically have to do in that case is swap the minor axis with the items axis, and then swap the items axis with the minor axis. So take these values right here, these companies, and bring them here, and then take these values, which is the stock information, and then move them to the minor axis. So how do I do that? I do that with the transpose method. Before I begin, I want to reiterate or explain something about how the axes are structured within a pandas panel object. So if I call the axes attribute as a reminder, that's going to give us all of the 3 axes that make up the pandas panel. We have the items, the major, and the minor. And they also receive a numeric structure too, just like everything in pandas does. So the most outer one, in many ways the most important one, is the items axis, which is the first one in line. So it receives an index position of 0 among the 3 axes that make up a panel. Afterwards, we have the major axis. In this case, this is our date time index within each of our data frames. And that major axis receives an index position of 1 among our axes collection. And finally, my minor axis, which currently in the P that I'm getting back is the companies, gets an index position of 2 among my larger axes collection. So I have to kind of remember where each one of these current things falls in line whenever I use the transpose method. So what I'm going to do here is call the transpose method directly on P. And what I basically have to do here is feed it a sequential list of numbers representing the index positions that I currently have, but the order in which I have to feed them is index, comma, major, comma, minor. So that's the structure that I want this new data or panel that I'm going to create to have. So the first thing I want to give here is what's going to be the items axis. Now what gets confusing here is I have to reference the axes positions as they currently exist. So what I want to serve as the items axis in my new panel is what is currently the minor axis in my P panel. This is what I want to do, and it currently has an items position among our axes of, it has an index position among our axes of 2. So when I put 2 here as my first argument, I'm saying that I want what currently is index position 2, which is my companies, to serve as the items axis of the new panel that's going to be created here. I then put a comma, and the next argument here is what I want to serve as the major axis. In this case, I want to keep my same major axis because I still want the rows in each data frame to be this date time information. So I have to reference what its current position is in P, which is 1. This date time index, this major axis, is a position of 1 in P, and I want it to stay as the major axis, so I'm going to put 1. Finally, the last argument that I give to the transpose method is what current axis I want to serve as my new minor axis. So what I want to serve as my new minor axis is my current items axis up here, and that currently has an index position of 0 among all of my axes, so this is what I put. So these numbers again refer to the current index positions of the axes in P, not the new panel that we're going to be getting, but our original one. But the order in which we feed them is going to be how Pandas figures out what to place as the items axis, which is first in line, followed by major, followed by minor. So 2, which is currently our company's minor axis, is going to now be our items axis. The date time index major axis is going to stay the same, and 0, which is currently referring to our items axis of the stock information, is now going to be our minor axis in our new panel. And I'm going to perform this operation. It's not going to modify the panel in place, but you can see here that the items axes and the minor axes have in fact been swapped. In fact, let me do one thing. Let me store this in a variable called P2. And then what I'm going to do is just output P in this cell and P2 below so you can see the direct comparison. So as we can see here, the major axis among the two stays the same. However, the items and minor axes have been swapped. In the original P open to volume is the items axis. It's now the minor axis in P2. And in the original P, my minor axis is my 5 companies, and now that is in the items axis position of P2. So I've basically switched around, molded, manipulated the entire panel object, and predictably, all of my methods are still here. It's a brand new panel object, but now I've kind of shifted things around. So now that my items axis refers to my companies, I can use bracket syntax to extract, and now I don't have to feed it a stock classification information like I did in P, because now my data frames that are being lodged within my panel object are my companies. So if I do something like Apple, well, now I'm going to get my information for Apple. This is my data frame related to Apple, and you can see that all of Apple's information is collected here. My minor axis, which is my columns, is now my stock information, which used to be my items axis in my P panel. And I can repeat this operation for another company like Google, and we get, predictably, a data frame that's related to Google's information. And predictably, all of the other methods, such as major axis and minor axis, are now going to work. So for example, if I want to do P2 and I want to do major axis, which is still, by the way, my datetime index, I can give a value like that, and that's going to, oops, there's underscores when I meant to put in dashes. And what that's going to do is, cut out that component of the panel, and now it's going to give me all 5 of my companies as my column headers and my stock information on the left side. Similarly, I can do something like cut out the minor axis. So let's do P2.minor axis, and let's say I want to consistently stick to one of the values in my minor axis. My P2 is now storing these pieces of information open to volume. So if I put in something like volume and cut that out, I'm now going to cut out that axis, and the resulting data frame is going to consist of the company name and my datetime. So all of my familiar panel methods and extraction syntaxes apply. You can see them all in play here, my bracket syntax, my major axis, my minor axis. However, we've swapped the locations of those companies and those stock pieces of information, so now the panel is a different object entirely. It's a panel still, but the positions have been swapped, and I can manipulate it differently. And if you're ever getting a panel that doesn't follow the kind of structure that you think is most logical in your head, all you have to do is call the transpose method and realign those axes, and within a second, Pandas will give you a brand new panel that's structured the way you want. So that's how you call a transpose method on a panel in order to swap one or more of its axes with another.